Welcome to the Ending Sexploitation podcast, where we decode sexual harm and provide you with active solutions. I'm your host, Kaylee McNamara. Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Ending Sexploitation podcast, joined once again by Dani Pinter. How's it going, Dani?
Pretty good, Haley. Glad to be chatting with you as always.
Yes, always good to see you, always good to talk with you. And today is going to be a slightly different take. Instead of responding to some current events, we're going to dive into some research about pornography's influence on desire, which is, I think, a really important topic. You know, we were talking even just last week around AI and these kind of AI character chats that are being created and the way that that might influence young people or really anyone who's interacting with them. And in a very similar way, we already see the way that sexually explicit material does have an impact on desire because there's a huge body of research all around this topic. And so I think it'd be great to just dive into this
Yeah, let's get into
topic.
it.
One thing that's interesting about pornography's influence on desire is that at first when people hear it, they think, what the heck? That shouldn't be a thing. People don't really believe it initially, but this idea of sexual arousal being very fluid, being something that can be morphed over time is well established in research, because even back in the 1960s, researchers did experiments where they got male participants to become sexually aroused simply by a black knee-length woman's boot, where they would be shown a picture of this boot for like 15 seconds, and then they would see a lot of images of nude women. And then over time, they did this a number of times. And then over time, all it took was the boot for them to become sexually aroused. And so and there's similar other experiments that have been done too, but it's just very fascinating that there is a long history of experiments that show us that kind of our sexual arousal templates, or like our scripts for what can sexually arouse someone, can be influenced and changed by what we're exposed to. So do you have any thoughts on that? Or when you first
Yeah,
were starting to dive into these issues, was it surprising to you?
I feel like this is one of those things that does make like my common sense in my gut is
Mm.
affirmed by these things. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. But it's interesting to think about when we talk about people getting desensitized a lot, and this is almost like the other side of the coin, where you're getting sensitized. It's like you're now being drawn to things maybe you weren't before. So I think it's fascinating, and it's so important for us all to acknowledge this because um, obviously this is going to affect our day to day. This is going to affect how we treat each other, sexual
Mhm.
relationships, you know, how sexual abuse looks. Like I'm guessing it tracks with the porn themes of the day, right? So it's such a practically important piece of research.
Yeah. And it's very interesting too how you could see how, and I think this is supported in the research as well, but that kind of influence on sexual arousal is really impacted by early sexual experiences, which is one
Wow.
reason why we find childhood exposure to pornography to be a really important issue. We care about adults too because it has public health harms. It's harmful to everybody in a variety of ways. But for children, it's an early sexual experience, and then that impact that it can have just really increases. We have a quote from one pornography user who said, "When I got internet back in my late teens, I found many YouTube-like porn sites that categorized content by fetish. At first, my tastes were those of a normal teenage boy, but over the years, my tastes shifted to aggressive content, violent themes against women to be more specific, especially those anime hentai videos with scenarios too vile to portray in real life." And I won't read this full quote, but another young man said, I gradually became desensitized and escalated to more extreme, brutal, and degrading videos. Actually, I'll go on and read the full quote. It says, and that hurts me even more because I am a sensitive and empathetic person and would never want anyone to suffer, especially not girls or young women in real life. It is devastating and cruel to see how you get accustomed to practices that you would naturally find disgusting and inhumane. End quote.
Wow.
So it's just so sad when we hear from, and I've heard, even just in personal life from people who talk about, especially early exposure to pornography, but just over time, how they find themselves being aroused by things that they would have found disgusting,
Yeah.
or inconsistent with their values, how they actually view other human beings in real life. So it's just very disturbing.
Yeah, and you can imagine, I mean, everyone, not everyone, but I should say that many of our critics like to say, well, you're attaching shame to pornography, and so that's why users feel shame because you're shaming them. When actually, if someone is now in a place where they're compelled to watch something that just conflicts with their own personal values that they don't want to change. Those are their values, but they're almost like out of control and now being aroused by something. That's going to cause cognitive dissonance and
Hmm.
shame and an identity crisis by its very nature. And that is just, I would say, objectively psychologically harmful to that person.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in this blog, we have a research summary that is about 100 studies, all peer reviewed on different public health harms of pornography. But this recent blog that NCOSE pulled out did highlight a couple of these. And so let's see if we can pull that up. We have, I think, at least 3 studies that were highlighted. Yeah, right here. Um, so let's just talk through each one of these because I think it's good to ground this in what the research is telling
Yeah.
us. And so as this says, one study analyzed over 300 popular porn scenes. They found that a little over 88% contained physical aggression and 48.7% contained verbal aggression. In most cases, men were the aggressors and women were the targets. But so far, none of this is particularly surprising to me. But one of the things I think is so important about this study, and it's been found in others as well, is that often the women being targeted by physical or verbal aggression, they either responded neutrally or with pleasure to that aggression. And what do you think about that and the message that that sends?
I think that sends a message that women do like or should like sexual violence. And now it makes me think of our previous discussion. We were talking about the Grok Annie companions, and you have Annie is the submissive female, avatar. She's an anime character who says yes to everything. And then Elon previewed the male character who's based off Christian Grey from 50 Shades of Grey. So to me, Elon Musk has said that he is a fan of pornography. Pornography is allowed on the X website. Was he influenced to think that, yeah, women like BDSM? That's why they're going to love this male BDSM character.
Mhm.
And now that's being distributed to the masses on
Oh,
X.
interesting. Yeah, that these themes can even just be morphing, therefore, what people who are creating platforms or creating tech assume women want or
Yeah,
are
they're
interested
influenced
in.
by this. Yeah. They think the
Yeah.
female male fantasy is an aggressive, abusive, you know, dominatrix. I don't know what it is for a male. Dom.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Dom. Yeah.
Yes.
And that is so true. Sometimes it's a part that I don't think about as much, I think because it's almost too depressing, but of how pornography is not just shaping the views of relationships, views of women, of maybe your boyfriend or a partner or a neighbor, but a boss, a technology creator, a judge, a legislator
And
who's deciding which bill should he push forward or not, a member of a jury who's deciding, as we talked so much about with the Diddy case, was a person actually coerced or did they secretly want it? like just these messages that are in pornography. And a 2020 study that's also listed here that just goes on to further support this. They analyzed Pornhub and X videos, some of the most popular sites, and they saw that women received 97% of aggressive acts that happened in pornography scenes. So it's just, that's the message, that it's not just children, because we now are in generations, I mean, millennials, many were raised being exposed to this content at young ages, and we're now entering positions of power, and therefore it has groomed, it's like not just grooming children, but it's grooming and has groomed people who are adults right now in how they view these issues.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We also can see here that, yeah, there was also a 2016 study that found that many pornography users escalate to viewing content that they were previously not interested in, and even that they thought was disgusting before they entered into it. So again, just so many studies, so many individuals who've spoken out about this. And for some pornography users, of course, not all, that can escalate into really spiral into the use of like really incredibly abusive content, including, just really extreme themes as well. We've talked before about even escalation into things like child sexual abuse material, unfortunately. Mhm.
And this is like what creates the demand for, um, you know, abuse, obviously, but even within the porn industry, because, there's been this big shining light of scrutiny on Pornhub and some of the other porn sites, because it's now just common knowledge that those websites were rife with horrific abuse, detailing real life abuse of people, and super problematic themes, even in professionally abused content. But like, why were people uploading their rapes? Because there's a demand for it. And why, people say, well, what about ethical porn? Where, well, it's pretty hard to, that's a cute theory, but like, how are you going to come up with ethical porn that people want to see? Because if pornography performers really have the agency to say no to the degrading and violent behavior, or say no to what they think would be problematic messages, because I know a lot of performers will talk about that, like, I don't want to pretend to be a child and simulate being a teenager in this, or I don't want to simulate this theme that I find problematic. Well, if they truly have the agency to say no to all of those things, guess what, like, this content is not going to get made. We would all be the better for that. But that the people trying to make money, the production companies trying to make money, and these websites are just going to move on to the either production companies or the criminals who don't have those scruples. And that's
Mhm.
why, like, we have to just reject these themes and these things from the get go. If you don't create a demand for it, that takes away the motivation, for the most of it. And if these studies reveal, is the likelihood is, if tomorrow all of these problematic and dangerous themes went away, obviously people would be disgruntled for a time, but the next generation, they likely wouldn't have even be demanding that content, because they weren't exposed to it in the
Mhm.
first place. So, it's like, their healing is possible, but we have to actually demand more. We have to actually reduce the demand for these really problematic and harmful themes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think we know too that pornography shapes desire and has impact on what people are aroused by, not only by like so much clear research being done that just clearly shows that pornography use is often escalating in nature, for especially if you're a regular user, and escalating to more violent or larger volume or more shocking type of material, and then that being normalized. And actually, let me before I was setting up like a two-part sentence, but let me just like pause there again, because I think one thing that it's blatantly obvious to everyone, but sometimes people just kind of skim past it. Like, you're not looking at pornography like you're looking at the Mona Lisa. There is sexual engagement that's happening, and there's dopamine spikes happening in the brain with sexual release. And that is embedding the messages of the content that you are viewing far deeper, like
Yeah.
into your brain chemistry than simply watching a Star Wars movie, because that's often something too that people will say. So they'll say, I watch Star Wars, it doesn't mean I think that like my lightsaber is going to work. But this isn't, you're not watching Star Wars, and it's something that people are watching over a long period of time, and the research just shows that it does have an effect. It like normalizes what you're viewing, and as these young boys whose quotes we read, often normalizing things that they inherently would have found disturbing or not arousing in the first place. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before I have
I
another
just think
thought,
that's
but
a really compelling point. Like, you're not passively watching, you're engaging with it sexually, and going through the cycle of a sexual act with that. And the research shows that like there's significant chemical and brain effects to that. That's just
mhm,
proven now. So it's something to take really, really seriously. Yeah.
mhm. And then another piece is that, so we have this research, I guess was what I was starting to say, is like we have this research that just really shows this is true, but we can also look at culture in for some of these cues too, because with the pornography industry being so normalized, we see like the rise of the sexual meme in so many ways, where the pornography industry introduces a concept and it quickly gets taken up and spread through like our culture, where people began mimicking what the pornography industry introduced. One version of
Yes.
this
Yeah,
could
give us an example.
one version of this could be like women completely shaving, which maybe some people did, but like in the 70s, no one was doing that. It just wasn't the norm. There wasn't a desire or a demand for it because people didn't see it. And so it was like a very small minority, and that has become far more popular. There's like a whole waxing industry has emerged, right? As a result of that being normalized, and now it's like in our culture. And um another example would be the rise of choking, which has been really documented to become a dominant experience that many women have. And there's this great article that came out from The Guardian that I'd love to hop into in just a second. But I mean, even just anecdotally, I've spoken with so many women who have been choked, who even were choked without the guy ever asking. And then when she stopped and was like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Oh, don't women like this?" And it's a new phenomenon. This wasn't nearly so common 20 years ago. It's really an extension from what has been happening in the pornography industry. But Dani, any thoughts on like the sexual memes coming out of the pornography industry, or like the concept of choking? I know is one that we want to talk more about because of this Guardian article.
Yeah, that's just fascinating. I hadn't really, I don't know if I'd heard that theory. I mean, it sounds, I mean, that tracks completely what you're saying about the sexual, or what did you call it? The meme?
The
What
meme,
meme? Yeah, but
sexual
like the
meme.
sexual meme. I think that's fascinating, and I think it's right that we can kind of draw conclusions from those wide scale societal norms being changed. I think you can draw conclusions, right, of the influence of pornography not being small but being large. And the choking, the first things I'm thinking about, it made me think of two things. One, um, not only is it just dangerous that this has become a common practice, but I think we need to recognize that it also provides cover for some very, very bad actors. And a few years ago, for example, more than one, a couple women died by choking, and the men were being prosecuted for murdering them by choking them to
Mhm,
death. Their defense was that this was just rough sex gone wrong. And my understanding is
mhm.
that defense was successful. Maybe we can find those articles and put them in the chat. I think this was happening in the UK, maybe Australia. But
Yeah.
this, by making so mainstream that it's not even like a fetish, like it's not even BDSM, it's now a vanilla or like common sexual practice by normalizing to that extent. What are the real world consequences? The real consequences are that people can get hurt on accident, and that bad actors can harm women intentionally with no accountability, because how are you going to prove now this woman's dead? How are you going to prove whether or not that was a consensual choking or not? The fact is you shouldn't be able to consent to a life-threatening violent act towards you. It's just not, should not be permitted. And we see even in, breaking news, the recent news coming out about Lauren Southern, who was a famous right-wing influencer in like the 2015, 16, 17. She just came out with a memoir, and she detailed allegations that Andrew Tate violently assaulted her,
Mhm.
including choking her. Now, of course, his defense is like, no, I didn't do anything wrong. We engaged in consensual sex. And I think decades past, just the notion that choking was involved would dispel any ability to say it was consensual. But now there's confusion. It's like, not only does she have to prove the assault, she has to prove that the choking wasn't consensual. I
Yeah.
think that's a real problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just such an important point of by this theme being normalized that it does give so much cover to abusive scenarios. And I was at a sexual violence conference a couple of years ago, and there was a presenter, and I think her background was in police work, and she was talking about how strangulation is so dangerous and so serious in intimate violent intimate and personal domestic violence situations, that strangulation, she said, was actually one of the most lethal forms of domestic violence and sexual violence. That is very common. She responded to so many cases of it that there's a lot of confusion around it because people would think, oh, well, there's like it for it to be violent, it would mean that there would be bruising, and sometimes there's not bruising, and she just, like, walked through how juries would be so confused around sexual strangulation and if it was abusive, if it was consensual, just like this case that you just shared. But she shared that if someone is non-fatally strangled by their intimate partner, and I looked this up, they are 750% more likely to be killed by that person.
Wow.
S So that link between obviously not every person because it has become a sexual meme and it is something that's become more popular with younger generations, but it is a incredibly significant risk factor for someone being murdered by their intimate partner for that to be introduced into the relationship.
That's
And
frightening.
Mhm. And we can go over now to this journal article because I just think sorry, the Guardian article, and it's called "There's No Safe Way to Do It: The Rapid Rise and Horrifying Risks of Choking During Sex." And I don't know, Danny, if you had a chance to look through this,
Yeah.
but it's interesting because it includes some stories of young women who talk about, there's about just being in dating culture and hookup culture and meeting up with a guy at a bar and getting together with him and being choked and being surprised that he thought it was okay the first time that they're being intimate, the first time that they've met, to jump straight into that, and just how common this has become and concerns around it. So yeah, any thoughts in general on this?
Well, I want to go to that highlighted section.
Mhm,
I think that's super shocking. One, well, and I did skim through this article, and now I'm wondering if it was this article or another. So this highlighted section says evidence suggests that strangulation is now the second most common cause of stroke in women under 40. And something else I saw was that um, that they and I hope hopefully we could find this if it isn't in here. It was that brain scans of women who have been choked. You can actually see the damage and impact on their brain.
mhm,
That's frightening, and I don't think many people are aware of that. Of how like even what they would think was maybe safe choking was still causing them brain damage.
mhm,
And then that second sentence was that I think it said like a sobering piece of research was that it was more harmful than waterboarding or more
Yeah.
dangerous than waterboarding, which we acknowledge as an unacceptable form of torture. Yeah,
Mhm.
more dangerous than waterboarding. Um, and this reminds me of something that Kristen Price has always brought to my attention. And I think, Haley, didn't you testify to the UN about this, which is that many times, like, pornography and these themes and this violence is actually torture, again, violence against women, and should be
Yes.
categorized as such.
Yes, absolutely. And that's just it's just really true. Like what you're seeing in most mainstream pornography, and we were talking about those statistics, like 99% of this content showing violence against women or 88%, just depends on the study. It is violence against women is torture. That's violence, that's abuse. And because a camera is there and someone is like being sexual, the abuse part is just skimmed over. I think one other really concerning piece about this like rise in choking culture too is this presenter who I heard speaking about it said that it actually people will say, oh well, there's a safe way to do it. Just hold the neck like this, apply pressure like that. But what this article from The Guardian is saying is if you look at the impact, on risks of stroke, on their brain, on risks of so many other harms, there is not a safe way to do it. And this presenter who I heard speak about it said that actually, for a man to kill a woman with strangulation, it takes less pressure in his hands than it takes to pull the trigger of a gun. It actually does not take much, and it can happen in a minute or less than a minute. Here in the journal article, they say necks are fragile. Blocking the jugular vein requires less pressure than opening a can of Coke. So all of these people saying that there's a safe way to do it, it's just not true. They're getting their information from the pornography industry. They're not getting their information from the research. But I know, Dani, that we're short on time and that you have to hop off. Any final thoughts on the impact of the pornography industry on desire and society?
Just thank you for bringing us the research, Haley. It's so important to always go back to the research and make sure, we're supporting this with evidence. And we always try to do that to our audience so that, we take the research and the quality of the research very, very seriously so that we can bring you good and accurate information. So thanks for always doing that for us, Haley.
No, of course. Thanks for chatting about it with me, Dani. In the show notes, we will include a link to the Guardian article, to the blog that we pulled up here, and we'll also try to include a link to our research summary of nearly 100 peer-reviewed studies on various harms of pornography. So please do check out that research. Give us a like, a subscribe, a review at Ending Sexploitation podcast. Thank you all so much for joining us in Ending Sexploitation.